Let's be brutally honest. The year is 2025, and the one nation that keeps America awake at night is not China, it's India. For decades, Washington dismissed India as a sleeping giant, a land of promise but not performance. But now, that giant has woken up. India is the fastest growing major economy, building its own technology, flexing its military muscle, and setting the global agenda on its own terms. And that terrifies America. Because for the first time in history, the United States isn't just competing with another superpower. It's facing a democracy with unstoppable momentum, 1 billion-plus people hungry to lead, and a future that refuses to be dictated by Washington. They said it wouldn't happen. They said India would remain the land of potential, the eternal underachiever, a nation with ambition but no execution. And yet, here we are in 2025, staring at the single fastest growing major economy in the world. While much of the West grapples with stagnation, inflation, and political dysfunction, India is roaring ahead with a clarity of purpose that the so-called global leaders can only envy. This is not just about GDP numbers on a spreadsheet. This is about the scale of transformation that makes old stereotypes crumble into dust. Step into Mumbai, Bengaluru, or Hyderabad, and you don't just see cities, you see powerhouses. Skyscrapers that rival Manhattan, tech hubs outpacing Silicon Valley, and an entrepreneurial energy that makes even America's startup culture look sluggish. Foreign investors are not lining up out of charity. They're lining up because they know where the future is being written. And it isn't in New York or London. It's in India. Manufacturing, once the West's pride, is rapidly being relocated to Indian soil. Global giants are moving operations out of China, and they're not choosing Los Angeles or Berlin. They're choosing Gujarat, Tamil Nadu, and Uttar Pradesh. That's not just economics, that's a tectonic shift in the balance of power. When the world's largest corporations decide that India is the safest bet for the next decade, it sends shivers down the spines of policymakers in Washington. And let's not forget the human factor. A nation of more than 1 billion people, the majority under 30, hungry to innovate, hungry to consume, hungry to lead. Compare that to America's aging workforce, and you understand why there's panic brewing behind closed doors in DC. India isn't borrowing growth from the future. It's creating it with relentless determination. The numbers are staggering, but the symbolism is even more frightening for America. For decades, the narrative was simple: America leads, others follow. But India has flipped the script. It doesn't need permission, it doesn't need validation, and it certainly doesn't need to play second fiddle anymore. And as each quarter passes, as each economic milestone is shattered, the uncomfortable truth becomes undeniable. The age of American dominance is slipping, and the rise of India is no longer a prediction, it's a reality. For decades, the geopolitical chessboard was dominated by one assumption: America called the shots, and the rest of the world danced to its tune. But in 2025, that smug certainty has been shattered. The old order is cracking, and at the center of this upheaval stands India, no longer the silent observer, but the decisive player. This is not the India of yesterday, politely waiting for a seat at the table. This is an India that has built its own table, and global powers are suddenly scrambling for an invitation. In Asia, the so-called pivot was meant to counterbalance China's rise. Yet while Washington obsessed over Beijing, it underestimated the quiet but relentless ascent of New Delhi. Now, India is not just a regional heavyweight, it's a continental anchor. It negotiates with Moscow without apology, engages with Washington without submission, and strengthens alliances with nations across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. The message is clear: it doesn't take sides, it takes charge. And then there's Bryce. Once dismissed as a talking shop, it has grown into a formidable bloc with India as one of its most credible engines. Expansion into energy, trade, and even currency cooperation is sending chills through the corridors of Western power. Because when countries start conducting business outside the dollar, when they stop needing America as the middleman, the game changes permanently. But the influence isn't just in boardrooms and summits. It's psychological. For years, the West treated India as a developing nation that should be grateful for aid and lectures. Now India is lecturing them on climate, on trade fairness, on global equity. And the world is listening. It isn't begging for approval, it's shaping the conversation. That stings in Washington more than any missile test or military maneuver ever could. What truly unsettles America is the independence. India does not bend. It won't be bullied into sanctions. It won't be guilt-tripped into wars that don't serve its interests. And it won't be trapped in the old binary of East versus West. Instead, it's carving its own path, one that reflects its size, its ambition, and its destiny. For the first time in modern history, a nation has emerged that can engage with everyone, yet obey no one. And that, more than anything else, is what keeps America's policymakers awake at night. Technology and defense, the two arenas that define the true stature of a modern power. For years, America monopolized them, waving its Silicon Valley startups and Pentagon firepower like a badge of invincibility. But look closely in 2025 and the story has changed. Because the country reshaping both frontiers isn't sitting in California boardrooms or Washington think tanks. It's rising from Bengaluru, from Hyderabad, from research labs and military bases spread across a land that no longer takes orders, but issues them. The tech revolution is no longer a Western playground. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, renewable energy grids, digital finance, India has stormed these arenas with a ferocity that few in Washington foresaw. When Indian-built AI systems are being deployed across Africa and Asia, when homegrown space technology is putting satellites into orbit at a fraction of NASA's cost, the world starts asking uncomfortable questions. Who's really leading innovation? Who's truly setting the standards of tomorrow? And then comes defense. For decades, the image was of India as a heavy importer reliant on foreign arsenals to protect itself. That image is now obsolete. Indigenous fighter jets, missile defense systems, cyber warfare units, even nuclear-powered submarines. These are no longer pipe dreams, they're realities. Each successful test, each unveiling of a domestically built system sends a jolt through military circles in Washington. Because it means dependency is over and autonomy is here. Let's not underestimate the symbolism either. When a nation sends missions to Mars and the Moon with budgets smaller than Hollywood blockbusters, it proves something very dangerous to America's ego, that technological brilliance isn't confined to Silicon Valley, and military might isn't reserved for the Pentagon. That realization gnaws at the very heart of US exceptionalism. But what really makes America nervous is the blend. Technology fused with defense, digital prowess combined with military modernization, an entire ecosystem of innovation that isn't just about consumer gadgets or apps, but about strategic dominance. It's the realization that wars of the future, cyber, space, drones, AI-driven battlefields, will not automatically be American domains. In short, the monopoly is gone. And in its place stands a nation determined to master the technologies of tomorrow while guarding its sovereignty with weapons built on its own soil. For America, that is more than competition. That is a nightmare. Fear is not something America admits easily. For decades, it has strutted across the global stage as the self-appointed guarantor of order, the indispensable power, the nation that others supposedly couldn't live without. But 2025 has exposed the cracks in that confidence. Because when it looks across the ocean and sees India's rise, what it feels deep down isn't admiration, it isn't respect, it's fear. A fear that the world it once controlled is slipping beyond its grip. This fear isn't irrational, it's rooted in cold reality. America's dominance rested on three pillars: economic supremacy, military superiority, and diplomatic influence. All three are being challenged at once. Economically, it sees growth rates it cannot match. Militarily, it sees independence it cannot dictate. Diplomatically, it sees alliances forming that it cannot break. For Washington, that's not competition. That's an existential threat to its role as the conductor of the global orchestra. And what's most humiliating for America is that this challenge isn't coming from a dictatorship like China, which it can demonize with rhetoric about freedom and values. It's coming from another democracy, one larger, louder, and more diverse, a nation that shares the very ideals America claims to defend, yet refuses to play by America's rules. That makes the fear more potent because it strips away the excuses. The panic in Washington is evident in its overreactions. Trade restrictions dressed up as national security concerns. Desperate charm offensives to lure India back into its orbit. Whisper campaigns in think tanks and media about instability and risks. But the truth behind the performance is plain. They are terrified of losing their monopoly on power. They are terrified that the 21st century might belong to someone else. At its core, America's fear is about relevance. For decades, it dictated the terms of globalization, war, peace, and progress. Now it faces a nation that won't be lectured, won't be cornered, and won't be dependent. That independence is more dangerous to American dominance than any weapon, any economy, any ideology. Because once one nation proves it can thrive without America's blessing, others will follow. And that is what truly keeps Washington awake at night. Not just the rise of a new power, but the fall of the illusion that America's word is law. Perhaps the most unsettling shift of all isn't happening in GDP charts or military budgets. It's happening in the global psyche. For the first time in modern history, the narrative is no longer India is catching up. The narrative is India is leading. That shift in perception is far more powerful and far more threatening than any statistic, because when the world begins to see you differently, power follows. For decades, India was patronized as the eternal, emerging economy, a country destined to always be on the verge of greatness, but never quite there. That patronizing view kept Western capitals comfortable, secure in the belief that they held the keys to progress. But in 2025, that illusion has crumbled. Now the world looks to India not as a junior partner, but as a driver of change. It is no longer framed as a pupil in the classroom of global politics. It is a teacher rewriting the syllabus. This change in narrative is what America finds hardest to swallow. It thrives on the idea that others aspire to be like it, that its system, its culture, its dominance is the ultimate benchmark. But here is a nation proving that success does not require American approval. That leadership does not need to be stamped with Washington's seal. It is building its own model, its own story, and the rest of the world is watching with respect instead of skepticism. The psychological blow is devastating. Every time India speaks with authority on the global stage, every time it refuses to toe the line, every time it achieves something the West doubted was possible, it chips away at America's aura of inevitability. The myth of unchallengeable dominance is unraveling, not because of confrontation, but because of confidence. And confidence is contagious. The rise of one independent power emboldens others. Nations once hesitant to defy Washington are now emboldened to pursue their own path. They see proof that you don't need to be in America's shadow to shine. That shift in mindset is as dangerous to US supremacy as any economic or military rival. In the end, the most powerful weapon India possesses isn't just its economy, its army, or its technology. It's the narrative, the story that the future doesn't belong to America alone. And once that story takes hold, no superpower, no matter how mighty, can control the ending.